right, good evening, everyone. My name is Janae Rasmussen. I'm currently a fourth-year orthopedic surgery resident, and I'm so excited to introduce tonight's guest speaker. Dr. Dixon has quite the impressive resume, and we're very fortunate to have her speaking with us. So she got her undergraduate degree in Spanish literature from Pomona College here in California. She did her medical school at USC, and she was, unsurprisingly, valedictorian, and she was also president of the Alpha Omega Alpha Medical Honor Society. This is the MD Honor Society for medical students that stand out in the top 10% of their class. She ended up doing a residency in orthopedic surgery at LA County / USC, and then she did a fellowship in foot and ankle surgery at Baylor University Medical Center in Texas. So she is also a graduate of the American Orthopedic Association, and she got a degree with the Marshall School of Business of USC, which was part of the Apex Leadership Conference. And so she currently has her own private practice in California. And one of the things that she decided to do with all of her experience and expertise was she became the CEO and founder and the sole owner of OrthoLegal. So this group with OrthoLegal Legal is a medical legal management company, and she's going to be talking to us about important medical legal practice for orthopedic surgeons and for those of us that are interested in orthopedics. We are so fortunate to have her here. If anyone has questions, please place them in the chat, and then we will likely have time at the end for some question and answers. But thank you so much again, Dr. Dixon, for your time being here, and we're excited to learn from you.
Thank you so much, Janae. And thank you everyone for being here. It's really exciting to talk with residents and interested students as well. So I have to admit, this isn't something that would have necessarily interested me when I was in your position in training, because like many orthopedic surgeons, the word legal just immediately put me off. But what you're going to find is that many people in private practice and many people in academic practice or other types of practice actually are able to supplement their income with legal work. And I'm here to tell you that it's very much a part of an orthopedic surgeon's practice. So my disclosures here, like Janae said, I am the owner and operator of OrthoLegal, which is a medical legal management company here in California. We have about 160 offices with, I think as of this week, 150 physicians working with the company, mostly orthopedic surgeons. So here's the question: why do medical legal work? And really, it's because some things are a little unexpected compared to the way we envision our lives. We all know the current state of clinical practice. We are seeing these reimbursements decline every year as Medicare cuts are going across the board with all specialties, but orthopedic surgery seems to be one of the biggest targets. You can see that across our subspecialties. Here's arthroscopic procedures going down since 2000. You can see foot and ankle procedures, same curve right there. And it's happening across the board. At the same time, there's increasing costs of clinical practice. So if you're at all considering a small group or private practice, you're going to be seeing this all the time. So at least here in Los Angeles, the commercial real estate is becoming more and more expensive, meaning that you're paying more for your rent as you're earning less money. Certainly in Los Angeles and across the state. In addition, minimum wage is increasing, and here in Los Angeles, it is a $25 minimum wage for a healthcare worker. That means every single medical assistant that you pay is $25 an hour. And it's important to remember that there's a massive workers' compensation system. Now, 60% of the workers' compensation claims are musculoskeletal. These are things like rotator cuff tears, lumbar spine disc herniations, carpal tunnel syndrome, cervical disc herniations, and other musculoskeletal complaints that people get on the job. When there's a dispute between an injured worker and their employer about whether or not an injury occurred on the job or how bad the injury was on the job, the state requires that an orthopedic surgeon get involved. So you can see this was 2022 data that I published in the Yellow Journal last year, perhaps. And we analyzed the data coming out of the state of California for contested workers' compensation claims. These are not the claims where someone gets injured on the job and it resolves quickly, or someone gets injured on the job, the employer provides all of the care and they go along their way. This is where the employer says, hey, wait a minute, I don't think it occurred on the job, or I don't think it was quite that bad. So, of all the contested claims, which in California go on to require what's called a QME, most of these were orthopedic. The next most common was pain management, and then the next was chiropractic. Well, guess what? The same kind of cases go to a chiropractor as an orthopedic surgeon or pain management physician. There's just different reasons why an attorney would pick a different specialty other than orthopedics, despite the fact that this is truly our specialty. And that has to do with looking for a certain kind of bias in how these cases are handled. But I'm telling you, these are the same cases. So another great thing about medical legal work is that there's no medical liability. You don't need malpractice insurance to do this. Many people go on to do it during retirement and they're no longer having to pay $40,000 a year for their malpractice insurance. And of course, number one reason people get into medical legal work is that it compensates better than clinical practice for the most part. So I want to explain to you the system of workers' compensation. I don't know how many of you have programs where you work with workers' compensation patients. I was at the LA County Hospital, so we did not take workers' compensation. Occasionally, on certain rotations at our private hospital, the Keck Hospital of USC, there were a few attendings who did do workers' compensation. So I had maybe a month's worth of exposure to workers' compensation while I was a resident. So I learned this all after graduating from fellowship. So if there's an injury at work, there are two ways it can go, as I alluded to before. Either there's no dispute or there is a dispute. If there's no dispute, the injured worker goes on to have treatment, and they will either make a full recovery or have permanent disability. So you can imagine a contusion. If they get a contusion at work, they go on to a full recovery. There's no financial settlement for simply a contusion that we anticipate will heal. If it's a broken wrist, you expect that there is not only treatment, but there's also some form of disability that they have now where they're worse off than they were before the injury. In that case, they get a financial settlement. So we're following this path here, okay? And they can get a financial settlement. It's missing a line right here. You can get a financial, it's here to permanent disability and then financial settlement. If they have an injury at work and there is a dispute over the claim, they can still get treatment. This dispute may not even be about the treatment. It may be about the final settlement. But at some point, a neutral third party, which in California is called a qualified medical evaluator, and in other states may be called an independent medical evaluator, at some point, the neutral third party comes in. The neutral third party may help to obtain treatment, or maybe the treatment is already done and they're just helping to move the case along for the permanent disability rating. That permanent disability rating is a number that QME doctors like me or workers' compensation doctors can use. We calculate it based on physical examination and impairment of activities of daily living. And then it goes to the state, and a financial settlement is then calculated from that. I'm not calculating dollars and cents. I'm calculating whole person impairment, and that gets translated into the financial settlement. So the benefits of workers' compensation cases in the realm of legal work is that they typically stay out of court. Another great thing in California is that they are very high volume. In fact, they're high volume in a lot of states, but not every state is as organized as California, and not every state pays as well as California does to help settle these kind of disputes. But it is about a $1 to $2 billion industry in California just to get these legal second opinions. The pay tends to be good. It tends to be steady income. This isn't like personal injury case where you just get piecemeal one case at a time. In this, I can go to a clinic and I can see anywhere from 8 to about 16 of these in a day, and I can do that every week. Fortunately, your pay is not dependent on the outcome of the case. The compensation is guaranteed by state law. It is written into state law. It is paid by workers' compensation insurance companies. And if they don't pay, they get fined. You get the penalties and interest. And one really great thing about this kind of work is that it is recession proof. I was doing this work during the pandemic, and there was concern that it would drop off. No one really knew what would happen. But guess what? There were massive layoffs in March and April of 2020. Many, many factories shut down. And then guess what? All of the attorneys were there for all of the injured workers who said, I was just laid off and I've had back pain for 5 years that I didn't even bother to report. But now I don't even have health insurance. What else am I supposed to do? The economy then picks up, people go back to the factories, and more injuries start happening. So no matter what happens with the economy, typically there's a bump in volume that we see. It's pretty remarkable, but the economy can go either way, and workers' compensation tends to have more claims. So personal injury, and again, laws vary by state. I can only speak to California. This is where I work, but I do some comparison in that Yellow Journal study that we reported, comparing different states. But about 4 to 5% of the personal injury cases go to trial. That means 95 to 96% of them either just go away or settle. Once they're at trial, they only have 50% success. This is why there's such a large number of these that settle. Everyone wants to settle them. The plaintiff knows it's a coin toss whether or not they're going to win. If they don't win, none of the attorney fees are covered. And so the attorneys are very incentivized to settle these cases before they go to trial. So that's really important to know. If you take one of these kinds of cases, it's very unlikely that you're going to have to appear in court, but you will probably have to provide testimony in different forms. The exception to the coin toss rule is if it's a motor vehicle collision, they are more likely to go to the plaintiff side, that is the injured party, as opposed to the defendant. So if you were injured in a car accident and you sue the person in a personal injury case, you are more likely than not to win. Medical malpractice. Now, this is something that I can't really speak to because I don't even touch it. I don't like to think about testifying against my colleagues. And so I don't touch medical malpractice cases personally. Tread lightly if you ever are going to do this. If you're doing this, you should be very, very experienced in legal cases. This should never be the first case that you do. Plaintiffs are only successful in 19% of medical malpractice trials. Hey, that's great. If it goes to trial, about 1/5 of them end up winning. 4/5 of them go to the side of the doctor. That's great. In this, the plaintiff is like an injured patient and the defense is a physician. But I would just caution anyone who is inexperienced, just stay away from these. So when I alluded to earlier that there's different types of testimony that you may be required to give whether or not it goes to trial. So almost every time you have some kind of written report, whether this report just goes on to a settlement or if it's something that a judge reads, it has to be a legal document. You're signing under penalty of perjury. This is an important report. This is not just a progress note that you're accustomed to writing. It's a lot more formal, and there's usually a structure to it depending on what kind of case you're doing. A deposition is a question and answer session with you and both of the attorneys, if you're the one, you're the witness testifying, expert witness or otherwise. And they're actually not as bad as you think. I'll go over that in a little bit more detail, but I'm here to tell you, don't be too scared of depositions. They're not as bad as you think. Now, trial, that is when you testify in court. There may or may not be a jury there, but you're wearing a suit and you're going to court and you're giving your live testimony there in court. So a report has standard formatting. This is pretty simple. A lot of physicians are very comfortable with the idea of sending a report and getting paid for a report. You get to charge for record review, all of this. Reports are our jam. We're fine with that. We're used to having to document. Depositions tend to be a little scarier, but guess what? They're almost all done on Zoom now after the pandemic. I did a lot of live depositions before, and now I haven't done an in-person deposition in like 5 years. Depending on the state and depending on the system, in workers' compensation, it's totally fine to wear scrubs. You could be more casual. If it's a personal injury case, I would probably dress up, but it's not as formal as court. And just a little bit of tips and pointers. Some of you, even as residents, may have already been called in for this kind of thing. It certainly happened to us at the county hospital. Sometimes people were subpoenaed to testify in a case. We had a lot of criminal cases and things like this. The thing that you want to remember is that you are the expert. So oftentimes you are only having to explain orthopedic principles in the same way that you do to your patients. I'll give an example. This was actually testimony that I gave actually in court, but they asked me, this lady tripped and fell. What is a Lisfranc fracture dislocation? And these are the kinds of things. I brought exhibits. I was able to show the exhibits. I was able to show the joint that was injured and explain why this is different from an ankle sprain. And so you're the expert. So you're often just having to give normal explanations as a medical expert. Now, the attorneys may read some articles here and there and kind of try to trick you because they're trying to get you to say something, but they don't necessarily understand the vocabulary that they're using. And so sometimes they ask questions that just simply don't even make sense. And you have to back up and remember, like, I know so much more than they do. Let me go back to the basics and explain exactly what that Lisfranc is. So you explain these concepts the same way that you would to a patient in layman's terms. So consider your audience, whether it's an attorney or whether it's a jury, you're generally just explaining what you do in layman's terms. So if you do have the misfortune of going to court, I've only had to do that once, and I've seen 3,000 cases. You do have to wear a suit. You're going to sit in this little seat right there. And you are the expert. So you're explaining these concepts to lay people. When I was there, and I was there as a treating physician, actually, it was one of my own patients that had a trip and fall. I treated her, Lisfranc, operatively. She later then decided to sue the store where she tripped and fell. And so I actually went through her insurance. I didn't even get paid like a personal injury case. I just got whatever insurance paid. And then I, on top of that, testified. But this was a jury trial. And so I basically just turned and faced the jury and explained to them my expertise. They asked some questions. Both sides asked some questions. It was really not hard. So general tips for testimony. This is just a little cheat sheet. Take a picture of this and refer back to it for your first deposition or your first 10 depositions. Make sure that you are enunciating very well. Speak slowly. There's a court reporter who is typing all of this out, most likely. Make sure that your yeses are yes and your nos are no. And just if it's a yes or no question, answer very clearly. Always wait your turn because people can't be talking over one another or the court reporter will call you out. If you're ever in a panic or you don't know how to answer, first thing you do is just stop. You can breathe. Guess what? Those gaps are not shown in the court reporter's rendition. If they try to hurry you, you can say, just one moment, I'm thinking about it. If you feel threatened or pressured, you can verbalize that. Keep in mind, if a judge is going to read this, they cannot read tone. They don't know if the attorney is raising their voice or acting unprofessionally. So you can say things like, will you please stop raising your voice at me? And that doesn't happen often. But it's a good tactic to use if they are being inappropriate. And it's okay to say, I don't know. It's better than guessing. Never guess. This is something that I wish I had known, hadn't been explained to me until, after, but they're always going to have objections. If there's not a judge there, basically one party can object to something, but you still have to answer the question. If the objection is sustained by the judge, they will just kind of cross out your answer and it will not be counted as testimony. But if the objection is denied, then your answer will count. So you always have to put your answer on the record, even if the other side objects. It's different in court. In court, if the objection is denied or is sustained, then you don't end up having to answer. most of the time when you are giving testimony, you've already written a report. You want to make sure you're not contradicting yourself. So I always have a second laptop up where I'm reading the report, and I'll read direct quotes right from it. They'll ask a question I know I've answered in the report, and I'll say, let me find that page, or do you know what page where I talked about this before? And then I just kind of read it directly. Sometimes they want you to interpret things, and that's different, but make sure you're never contradicting yourself. So, we've learned a lot harder things, and here we are now. This will be just another skill. This is orthopedic work. So I appreciate your curiosity and interest in this. Another spin-off topic on this that people sometimes want me to make mention of is entrepreneurship in orthopedic surgery. What brought me there? It was kind of out of necessity. I was always in solo private practice. I was doing the legal work myself, but I was really unhappy working for the company where I was working. And I realized I needed to do it myself. I think that entrepreneurship gives you the opportunity to really reconnect with your community, for me in orthopedics, and then as we expand out of orthopedics with other physicians in general. And I really want to promote physicians as business owners. I'm trying to help orthopedic surgeons and physicians take medicine back. We are capable of doing this. It's really fun. I enjoy it a lot. I get to work with a lot of my friends from residency. And I just knew I was not the kind of person for the employed model. I'm sure many of you can look at this picture and know that, when a beekeeper marks one, that's the queen bee, and that there's worker bees there. Many of us as surgeons are not good at working for other people. Despite this, 70% of physicians and orthopedic surgeons are now employed. So you may find a way that even if you have to be employed in your main job, you may find other business ventures that you wish to do. And I highly, strongly encourage you to do that. I want to see more and more physician entrepreneurship. So go out and get it done. So, and in addition, I get to enjoy a bunch of other things as well. So thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dixon. And I can't emphasize enough for everyone else on the call how this kind of education is not something that you will necessarily get in residency. For example, I'm at a community-based program where I actually do work with a lot of private practice attendings that are QME physicians, and so we get some of that exposure. But especially if you're at a more academic residency, you might not be able to get that kind of access. And to Dr. Dixon's point, if you're trying to learn this outside of residency or outside of fellowship, it's going to be much more challenging compared to empowering yourself to learn this information now. So I'm curious, Dr. Dixon, if you can talk about what was it, whether it was during fellowship or outside of fellowship, that made you, one, realize that maybe this is something I should pursue, and also give you that confidence? Like, what were the steps that you took to actually, one, go into the private practice world, but then also be able to become an entrepreneur and pursue these workers' compensation related work?
So those are good questions. And I don't know if I have a very satisfying answer for that, because foot and ankle is such a small field that there were very few jobs posted the year that I was in fellowship. So I applied to a couple of employed jobs. They didn't end up being the right jobs for me. And then I heard about a boutique sports and spine group in Los Angeles. And I was trying to get back to California, and it seemed to work out really well. And basically, this group had shared overhead, a very small guaranteed income for a short time, but really just tried to get you on your feet. And I figured, this is not a bad way to do it. Let's try it. And the great news is that later, when I was offered one of the positions that I originally wanted, I didn't want that position anymore. I didn't want the employed position. And you know in your gut if it's a good job or not. I truly believe that. If you're really thinking critically about it, like, listen to what your gut is telling you, do the research. 50% of orthopedic surgeons do change jobs after the first year. So changing jobs isn't a failure. Many, many people do it. In some ways, I changed jobs too. I just had to adapt My work has evolved a lot. The QME work came in later. I didn't start doing that. I didn't know what a QME was. And then I was mistakenly told that you had to have your board certification to do QME work, which is not the case. But I waited until I had my board certification. So I started doing QME work 3 years after graduating. And I had been moonlighting at Kaiser on the weekends. I was working 7 days a week. It was absolutely inhumane. And I could make more in one QME report than I could in a whole weekend at Kaiser. So it was absolutely life-changing the moment I started doing QME work. I thought it would just be a jumping off point. I ended up really enjoying it. I worked with another company for 3 years before they started evolving to the point that I felt like I was working for them instead of them working for me and managing my practice. And that's when I went out on my own. After the first year, after I'd worked out the operations, I then invited my friends and colleagues to join.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing all that insight. For those of you on the call who have not experienced working in the workers' compensation system, and Dr. Dixon, please correct me if you see anything differently, but so far my experience has been that oftentimes patients are coming to you and it's been like 6 months since the injury, and it can sometimes feel like an uphill battle with trying to request MRIs or additional imaging. And I'm curious from your perspective what advice you might have for those of us that might encounter a patient going through this system who are facing that discouragement, and how we can be better advocates for those patients.
It's a good question. I wish it were just 6 months. I'm often seeing people years after their injury and denial after denial after denial. There are some issues with the QME system, one of which is that it's, slow. California does really try to take care of the injured workers, but it's a slow process. Um, some of the issues with procuring imaging studies and diagnostic studies can actually bypass the insurance company utilization review process if the physician QME orders the study themselves. So if there is like an MRI, scanner next door, and you can say like, hey, just go in and get it today, get the x-rays today. But many of us as QMEs go to remote sites. And so we don't necessarily have those connections. So it does end up going through the utilization review process. It's case by case. Some insurers just deny everything. And then sometimes the best thing you can do is close the case to get it in front of the judge and try to get what you can approved later in the final settlement. But it is challenging, especially as residents. If you're seeing that it's repeated denials, you can suggest to your attending perhaps like, hey, maybe we just write the prescription and send them down the street. It's possible that it'll get done.
I know I've seen quite a few patients where we oftentimes have the conversation where is it worth, if they have private insurance, to basically just stop the claim to get the care that we think that they need, especially if it's been years down the line. And I don't know if that's the right decision or not, but I'm curious from your perspective what advice you would have, especially for those that are orthopedic surgeons and might be feeling really discouraged by the system and seeing those negative effects on patients, and sort of how to, which battles to pick.
Yeah, so technically, once they're in workers' compensation, we can't tell them to, close the case and go procure private treatment. People do that, but we can't tell them to do that. But what you can tell them to do is hurry up and get a settlement, and then take that money and get the care where they want, because there's two different options for future medical care. If the QME physician or the treating physician allows for future medical care, which I almost always do, it can become a part of the settlement in a lump sum, or there's the possibility of procuring it again through the workers' compensation system, which means needing to go through all the approval processes again. So I have told applicants, and we call them applicants if you're a QME because you're not technically establishing a doctor-patient relationship. But I tell them, like, talk to your attorney about getting this as a part of the lump sum. One of my more educated QME applicants told me, and her employer was UPS, she told me like, oh yes, there's both options, but they told me that if I do it that way, then I will have to take an early retirement. And there were other things that she had to waive. So all those kind of things go into the settlement. So it is more complicated than just, oh, lump sum or keep it within workers' comp. But it's possible that they'll be able to get a bigger cash settlement if they decide to close the case and take future medical care that way.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. And I know that this talk wasn't focused on, the non-workers' compensation related claims, but you gave a lot of really good advice about having good documentation. And I'm curious if you have any other general advice about the importance of documentation or how we can help reduce the risk of litigation in the future. I know that's something as a resident, I didn't even realize just how important documentation was until you start to see complications and then hear from attendings that tell you about just because this was not said, that means it did not happen, so to speak. And I'm curious if, especially since I know we have some medical students on the call who might think that, oh, it's just writing another note and don't understand the implications of documentation, and if you can speak to that.
Yeah, I can tell you a great story. It was the very last day of my intern year, and I was the last class of interns that had to take overnight call before the duty hours changed for interns. And lucky me, I was the one that was on call for June 23rd, the last day of intern year. So I spilled over onto the next day. I had like an extra evening of call. Just my luck, right? And I was intended to go to Italy for my friend's wedding, and there was another intern who had been able to arrange her vacation, so she'd been in Europe for a month before the wedding. The bride was in her PhD years of her MD PhD, so she'd been in Europe for a month, and I had that 7-day period between intern year and second year, and it had already been cut into by my call. So I'm driving to LAX around noon or so with the bride's dress so that I can go to the Amalfi Coast for all of 4 days. Land in Rome, drive 5.5 hours, got in at like 2 a.m., all of this. So anyhow, I'm driving to LAX and I'm done. I've handed in the pager. Intern year is done. And I get this call on my cell and I look down, and it's been 6 months since I was on neurosurgery, but it's a neurosurgery chief who's kind of a scary dude. And I'm like, oh goodness, what could this possibly be? Yeah, hi. How are you? Dr. Dixon, do you remember that one patient, so and so? And I think back, and yes, of course I remember this guy. He'd been in the hospital for like a month. He was seriously non-compliant. He had a very unstable spine. He had a 2-stage procedure where he ended up leaving AMA in between the resection and the stabilization procedure with just like a TLSO on. Guy was absolutely nuts. And of course, this wasn't going to go very well. And who was the intern that got to do the entire discharge summary? That was me. He'd been in the hospital for a very, very long time. And I said, of course I do. And he's like, so that guy is suing us. And I'm like, awesome. And he's like, but your discharge summary was so ironclad that the case was like absolutely completely dismissed. Like, good job, you just saved us all. And this PGY7 neurosurgeon doesn't have time to tell me exactly what goes into a discharge summary, but I knew what to put in it because I knew what the issues were. I knew what the problems were, but he doesn't have time to double check my work. He doesn't have time to sit there and enumerate for me like everything, but I'm just sitting there and I'm like, I can do a 10-minute discharge summary. I can stay here for an hour and like literally go through all of the documentation that I took about all of the ways that he was non-compliant, the AMA, the abuse to the nurses, like all of this stuff, and like discussing the risks and, him being very well aware and signing consent forms. Like I just went through like absolutely everything. That's the difference between good documentation and very poor documentation. And so you can really save a lot of money in the future because you can expect, you have malpractice insurance, but if you were paying cash, you can expect like $500,000 to go to trial. It's very, very, very expensive to go to trial. And it will drive up your malpractice costs. And the average orthopedic surgeon, last I knew, got sued 7 times. You don't want to be in that position. Take the time now, document very well, document all of your consents in every single consent, risk, benefits, alternatives, state the patient stated they understood. Uh, all questions were answered, and they decided to proceed with surgery. All three of those things. Um, these are really important, and I cannot emphasize, just like Janae said, if it's not documented, it never happened. And only you can really hold yourself accountable. Even as a resident, you're not going to have someone like able to really teach you this. So this has to be very much coming from within so that you learn it for yourself, because it will save you someday.
I'm so glad that you brought that up. And I want to like emphasize to all the residents and medical students on here as well that similarly, there was no one that was telling me or teaching me, here's how to document. But I got in the habit of anytime there was either a tense conversation or some sort of conflict or there was a discrepancy, I would write even like a brief like ortho update note. And when I would talk with like a family member over the phone, I would put like their name, relationship, and phone number to say I spoke to this person and like put it in bold in my note, and trying to make it as clear as possible as opposed to I talked to the daughter.
Yeah.
And those are things that in hindsight, I know I've had a lot of attendings that have said, this is super helpful. It makes it really clear about what was said in a conversation. But thankfully, I haven't experienced litigation. Hopefully won't have to anytime soon or ever. But I really appreciate you emphasizing that because that's something when I came into residency, I wasn't even thinking about that. I was just like, what's the dose of Tylenol to give to this patient? What's a good stool softener? And not thinking about the implications of how those conversations can make a really big difference. So I hope everyone on the call really listens to what Dr. Dixon said and takes that to heart. And I see we have a question from Janice. Thanks for joining us.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Dixon, for taking time with us today. My question was, you had mentioned documentation and it was your intern year. So when do you feel like you had learned how to add the right things? Did you do it throughout when you were doing your rotations, or did you just do it along the way? Like, how did you feel like you got the most experience to add the right things, to know what was the right things to document?
You learn this by being on the wards. It was definitely started like the very moment I got on the wards in third year at USC, where we were given a lot of responsibility as medical students. As medical students, we couldn't imagine that the hospital could possibly run without us when we were out on like Christmas break. And then as interns, you realize, oh, yeah, the medical students help, but the hospital could never run without us. And then, you go through and every year you think that you're running the whole place. And then, you graduate and you're like, they're going to fall apart without me. They don't. But everything you do during those years is equally important. And a medical student note can point out things that a resident note might have missed. So always take it on yourself to document as well as you possibly can. Put in your observations. Never do anything that's like incriminating to your team. Those aren't the kind of things you want to put in. Be very, very careful about documentation of any complications and how you handle that with patients, because complications are expected and normal, and there's a broad range of normal. So be really careful about saying anything negative in the notes. Keep a neutral tone, be factual, but just really imagine that your note is going to be in court.
I wanted to just share a recent call case that I had. It was a female in her 20s who had basically tried to into a truck. She fell and she ended up having what's called a subtalar dislocation. So for those of you that aren't familiar what those are, they're not very common. And unfortunately, this individual went to a small community hospital where they were told that it was reduced after close reduction. And that emergency room doctor gave photos to the patient that said it was reduced. And 10 days later, they show up in my ER with still horrible pain. it was not reduced, and the family showed me, here's what the emergency doctor said was reduced. And I was put in the position at 1 in the morning of, I don't know what happened at that hospital, and I want to be careful that I'm not saying anything incorrect. I'm not throwing anyone under the bus, and really focus the conversation on you're here now. Here's what I can do to help you. I can't speak to what is going on at that hospital, but I was very clear in my notes saying, this is what the family had said to me without me trying to interpret that, and also making sure that in my documentation, and even before I started my attempted close reduction, I was upfront with the family saying there's a good chance that I might not be able to get this successfully closed reduced in the emergency room because this is 10 days out. This might have to go to the operating room. And that was such a really powerful learning experience about how important it was to set those expectations and being really mindful about what you say to a patient. Not only is it important for how you're going to take care of them, but also being mindful that you don't know what you don't know. I'm sure it sounds like Dr. Dixon, you've probably been in similar scenarios, but I just want to I share that story just for everyone on the call who hasn't been in that uncomfortable space yet, that you will be there many a times as a resident, as a fellow, as an attending. And just remember, you can only control what you can control, which is how you talk to the patient, and just being really mindful about not trying to throw anyone under the bus, and being really mindful about how you document is really essential. So thank you for sharing your lessons.
Yeah, thank you. And I see that there's a question from Noella asking what practical steps we would recommend for a medical student interested in legal testimony. Um, I honestly think that it's just something to keep an open mind about. You will have so many experiences as you go through. If you're very, very interested in the legal field, of course, there is the possibility of an MD/JD. I know an orthopedic surgeon who did a JD as like a just to get some easier years. um, but you don't need a JD to do this kind of work, which is really good news, but keeping an open mind about it. And you don't really need to do anything while you're in residency. Your job in residency and your job in medical school is to be the best medical student you can, to get into the best residency you can, be the best resident that you can, so that you learn how to operate well, you learn all of these principles, and that's how you become an expert. Once you're an expert, then people will seek your opinion. That's really all that the legal work is. So I just say, do your absolute best every step of the way, and people will come clamoring. Now, if you are in your senior years of residency, do keep in mind that if you want to do something like the QME work in California, you can take the exam during your fellowship year so that you're ready to start doing the work as soon as you are in practice and have that ancillary income coming in. And then that kind of opens the door to more possibilities for jobs, because maybe you don't need this high of a salary because you know you're going to have ancillary income also.
I was wondering if you could also talk a little bit more about the entrepreneur space. And I think a lot of people, including myself, oftentimes feel really intimidated not having an MBA, not necessarily having a formalized curriculum, especially in medical school and even in residency, about running a business. And so, what advice would you have for us, either during our training or after our training, to help potentially pursue that as an option?
Yeah, I don't think it's really possible to do much other than survive while you're in training, if your training is anything like mine. So you don't need to do any of that now. You're not going to learn it during residency. You're there to learn your specialty. When you are first out, if you choose to go the private practice route, you're going to learn everything the hard way. I certainly did. No one's there to teach it to you. I wish that there were a simpler answer than that. But an MBA won't help you either. An MD MBA will have the exact same struggles in private practice because you're learning all of the same new stuff. You're learning more nuanced things of business, like if you're hiring people, how to make good hires. I have made so many bad hires, and it is so expensive to have bad hires. Hundreds of thousands of dollars lost on bad hires, and I can tell you every which way they end up costing money. And you don't learn that until you've done it a bunch. And what I learned is that I cannot be the person doing the initial interviews. I need some help because I lose objectivity if I'm the one that posted the job, reads the CV, does the initial interview. All of a sudden, I just want to hire someone and I'm not making the right choice. And I get a little bit attached to the people and I start to like bend the rules and think like maybe they could work out for this when they're really not the best for the job. But if someone presents them to me and I just have 5-10 minutes to sit down with them, I could be like, no, they're not right. Or like, yes, this person is fantastic. So those are like the kinds of things that they're not going to teach you in business school. Business school is for work, is for employed positions. It really is. It's not for being an entrepreneur. Business school does not teach you entrepreneurship. Some of the core curriculum can be helpful, like accounting. Learning the basics of accounting is available online. I keep saying I'm going to take the course. I started the Wharton course. I don't know how many times, and I've done like the first 6 weeks of the curriculum like a million times, but I haven't gotten through it because I'm just too busy in the real world actually doing stuff. So, and I have accountants and I have a bookkeeper. So it's important for me to be able to communicate, and I talk with bankers all the time. It looks really different. There's kind of different kinds of entrepreneurship. I'm more like the old school kind where I still own the company. It's kind of like how Nike was started. They just like went to the banks and asked for loans and just like reinvested without giving away equity. What you're going to see now is a lot of people are just gearing up to sell to private equity. That's obviously not the way that I'm doing it. I have a lot of issues with that because of the longevity of companies that go that way. There's always a 3 to 5 year plan for another sale. And that's not what I want to see happening with my company, which is my baby. So you're like, if someone's like, oh, what about an incubator? What about like having to be in San Francisco? I've done none of those things. I've never pitched my company to anyone, trying to sell it, trying to, give away equity, trying to get investors involved. I haven't done any of that. So in some ways, I'm not experienced in the way that many, many, many people start companies now. But I'm telling you, I think the old school way is actually better because I want physicians to be in charge of healthcare again.
And what are some common mistakes or things along the way that you've learned that you would love to throw out about entrepreneurship or even just thinking about starting a business?
It's always more expensive than you think. So you should have a lot of runway of your own. Hopefully, you have gotten some ancillary income of your own. And it takes a lot longer than you think. And be very wary. A lot of times when you're thinking about starting a business, a lot of people want to get all these other people together, like, oh, I'm going to go in with my buddy who's going to, who also does this work. And you need to really think about if you're putting a team together, what does each one bring to the table? If they have the same skill set as you're going to find yourself in a frustrating group project where you're probably the one doing all the work, because if it was your idea and you're bringing people in with your skills, like it's redundant. They don't need to be there and they're not going to lessen your load whatsoever. So if you're bringing in a partner, make sure it's very strategic, that you know exactly how they factor in and they're filling a need that you don't have. One of those can be capital. Maybe they're very wealthy and they can bring in additional funds to the project, or maybe they're a software developer and they have those skills and you have, your medical skills and they have their software skills and you're going to make an app. That makes sense. But just getting like a couple of your colleagues to go in together to start something, you're going to find yourself in the worst group project known to man, and you will probably lose all your money and be very angry about it. I see a question from Jihad. Do I think working in an academic hospital after residency would be helpful and impactful for understanding medical legal environment? No. Academics, you're very sheltered from most of this. You will not learn anything med legal as a professor. In general, it's the private practice people who do this. There's other benefits to being in an academic center. Number one, you have a peer group. When you're in solo private practice, you are all alone. If you are the only specialist of your kind in a group, you are all alone. I would get pelons and I would look for someone to scrub in with me on a case because I was always scrubbing in with everyone else and helping them out. And then suddenly I'd get some complicated case and they were like, nowhere to be found. And I was there by myself doing cases without even a first assist. running cases by other people, like those kind of things, they're gone after you're out of residency and fellowship unless you go back to an academic center. Really take advantage of these conferences that you have and things like that, because those go away. Like, I actually meet up with the other orthopedic foot and ankle surgeons in Los Angeles once a quarter, and people show cases and all of this. And that's the only time I ever get to see cases presented again and learn how other people would approach things. It doesn't happen after you're out of an academic center. So there's a lot of benefit to being at an academic center first. It wasn't for me, but exposure to legal work is going to happen when you're out on your own.
All right, I want to open up the floor to anyone else that might have questions. I want to be respectful of your time, Dr. Dixon, and we're so appreciative of you giving us so much more information than any of us had even anticipated. So thank you for including your advice on entrepreneurship. And like Dr. Dixon said at the beginning, while on the surface, this topic might not seem that exciting, the takeaways from this that I hope everyone goes home with is whether or not you become a QME or do medical legal work, understanding the implications and that this is a potential opportunity can be very helpful, especially when you're thinking about potentially starting your own business or you have all of our medical school loans and you're trying to think about how to maximize paying that off. So we're just really appreciative of you sharing all of your insight, Dr. Dixon. Is there any other closing remarks that you would like to give, since I don't think we have any other questions?
Yeah, I just want to reassure everyone that this is very normal. I didn't mention the statistics that 1 in 3 orthopedic surgeons in California does do this work, whether or not they talk about it. It's very, very common. So it's fairly likely that you're going to be doing some kind of this work in the future. So keep an open mind to it. You may find that you enjoy it. The forensic kind of looking for answers is actually fun for a lot of people. And a lot of my colleagues make most of their money doing this, less money make in their clinical practice. So it's very much a life changer. Keep an open mind about it, stay curious about it. And, any questions, don't hesitate to reach out.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Dixon, for taking the time. And thank you, everyone, for attending this webinar.
Thank you, everyone.